Chapter 11. Goodbye, cruel world. My boy, Mark Robert, godson to me and son to a friend, has a tent pitched in the yard outside his pappy's house in Limeru in Kenya. Mark is 6 years old. He has his air gun and his cooking equipment and most of his lares and pennants in the tent. But up to now, he is afraid to pass the night in the tent, although Mummy is within easy hail, and he has a lion dog, Sam, part dachshund, part cocker, to keep the carnivores at bay. But don't you want to spend the night in the bush in that tent all by yourself? I asked young Twain, who is called Twain because his first name is Mark, if that makes any sense. No, said young Mark Twain. Why, said I. I'm too scared, said young Mark, a tad of appalling frankness. I admire honesty in the young, and this particular spat of rare commodity reminded me of some days when I had a tent pitched under a magnolia tree in Southport, North Carolina, to which I retreated when the adults became too heavy to bear. It was a tent quite like young Twain's tent, and no more distant from the house. We had a difference of opinion, as I recall. My people and I determined to run away and embark on a life of piracy, rapine, and highway robbery. I was a red-hot 6-year-old, and the Irish was showing. The whole world was wrong, and you could have called me Parnell. Goodbye, cruel world, I said, more or less, and departed for a life of shame. I must say that the old man took it in stride when I announced my intention to trek. You sure you going to give us all up and run off to live with the Injuns? He said gently. I mean, we don't get no chance to mend our ways and maybe keep you with us until you get out of the 6th grade? The old man had a dirty twinkle, but this was dirtier than usual, and made me even madder. You'll be sorry when I'm gone, I said. There won't be nobody around the place to fetch the firewood and run the errands and clean the fish. You'll be sorry, all right. The old man heaved a sigh. That's what I was afraid of, he said. Without I got you, he gestured in the general direction of Miss Lottie and the other grown-ups, they'll be making me do your work. Maybe I could run away with you. No, sir, I was very firm. Figured even at my tender age that running away was something a boy had to do all by himself, or it didn't count. No, sir, I said. At the time, I had not encountered Mr. Dickens and his Sidney Carton and a bad gag about it. It is a far, far better thing than I do. Had not crept into my working vocabulary, but I was thinking it all right. I'm going now, I said, full of dignity and trepidation. Well, goodbye, the old man said. His tone was solicitous. You've got everything you'll need, matches, hatchet for firewood, air rifle to shoot birds with. You better take some eggs and bacon to tide you over until you start living off the country. Be careful of snakes. If you do get struck, try to cut across over the bite, tie on a tourniquet, pour in some gunpowder, set it afire, and if you can find somebody to suck the poison out of the wound, do so. Getting snake bit is a messy business when you're off on your own, because you generally can't reach the place where you're bit to suck out your own poison. The old man fired up his pipe and looked at me under lowered lids. You ain't going to find it very comfortable, he said. I mind tell I run away once when I was a kid. Of course, we ain't got any Injuns now, except tame ones in Robson County, but in them days the place was populous with redskins. A man come home with his hair on was an exception. I knowed one feller he got scalped before he was dead. The Injun run off with his hair, and when the man come to, he was permanently bald. Had to buy a wig to cover his shame. There ain't any Injuns around now except some brass ankles, I said, and they ain't really Injuns. True, the old man said, but you want to watch out for such things as wild hogs and wild cats, and the stray panther now and then. That air rifle is all right for robins and such, but like that mockingbird you killed that made your grandma so mad. But a BB gun don't stack up very high against a wild boar. And when you're reduced to eating what you can find in the way of herbs, I suggest you watch out for the poisonous toadstools and berries I don't even know about myself. What might seem like a sparkleberry to you might be something entirely different when they do the autopsy. You're just trying to scare me, I said. I'm leaving. Goodbye. Would you mind shaking hands, the old man said, and shoved out his paw. We may never meet again in this life. Feeling very noble, I took his hand, shook it, and went off. to the wilds of my tent. Figured I would mount the expedition from the tent, straighten out my gear, pack my rucksack, and depart before dawn. Goodbye, sir, I called and choked back a sob. Frankly, I was on the hook, and there wasn't any way to get out of running away except to run away. You know how lonely it can be in a tent, even in the side yard, when the night falls and there's no place to go except the tent, with the world opening up ahead of you and no point of fixed destination? Yes, just about that lonely. The house was maybe 30 yards away. It could have been a million miles, because my pride had removed it from my kin. There were lights and laughter by it, but I, the outcast, was now not allowed to share either lights or laughter. I was stuck in a tent, ringed around by loneliness. Night noises came on, late blooming mockingbirds tuned in. Bugs zoomed and swooshed and plunked against the canvas. Frogs croaked. The whippoorwills made a symphony of sadness. Things popped and crackled and boomed and snapped and crackled and stalked by on careful feet. Over there an owl hooted. Over yonder a dog howled, which meant somebody was dead. A lonely, frightened colored boy started a sad song to stave off the demons of the dark until he got to Foxtown. And me, I had acute claustrophobia, complicated by active fright and a vague guilt consciousness. I was trapped in a tent, and over that away lay the far shores, and I didn't know precisely how I was going to achieve those far shores, certainly not in the middle of the night, with all the sounds and the things, all the birds, bugs, and beasts against me. But I couldn't leave the tent, although the rustle I had just heard was certainly a moccasin, an adder or a rattler. The man had his pride. Once you start to run away, you gotta run away. I peeked out of the tent flap, and the house had never seemed brighter, gayer. Life was in the house, and there I was, dead stone cold in the dark in a tent. Make a fire, I said aloud, but then I considered that I would have to go and rob the house of firewood, which was a poor way to start a life of crime. Also, there wasn't any flue in the tent. Anyhow, it was too hot for a fire, although a fire might have been a heavy help against the mosquitoes, which were now beginning to concerted drive on my carcass. Now I was hungry. Figured that I would live off the country I had spurned the old man's suggestion about bacon and eggs. There was no country I could live off at this moment. It was the wrong season for figs and grapes and pecans, which were all we grew in this plot. The mosquitoes buzzed and my belly growled. Lone and lorn and intent was civilization 30 yards away, and me too proud to compromise. The owl hooted louder, the whippoorwill keened, the dead man's dog howled. Footsteps padded softly across the lawn. You all right in there? The old man's voice was soft. Anything I can do? I'm fine, I said. Don't worry about me. And I must have snuffled back half a sob. Well, the old man said, I'm kind of a committee. I'm speaking on behalf of your ma and pa and grandma. They reckon that maybe they were wrong. There was wrong on both sides, and if you could see your way clear to make a parlay, we might be able to straighten things out. Mind you, the old man said, we ain't asking you to give in on anything that offends your sense of what's right and wrong. It's just that we're having deep dish apple pie for dinner, and it seems a shame to waste the spare slice. You reckon you could come in under a flag of truce and we could work the whole thing out tomorrow morning over the ham and hominy? Even at 6 years old, I wasn't no fool. I knew a concession when I saw one. I stuck my head out of the tent. My relieved soul wanted to cry, but I made the voice cool and bored. I'm willing to talk business if you are, I said, when what I wanted to do was jump up and wrap myself around his neck and weep out of sheer relief, not knowing then that the old gent had really pulled me off the hook and left my self-respect intact. That's why I suspect I'm glad my boy Mark Robert was honestly scared to spend the night in that tent in Limaru. He didn't have to go through that horrible evening I spent before we called the conference next day. There's nothing as lonesome as a tent when the home fires are burning within spitting distance, and I do not recommend running away unless there is a circus handy to join. And there are so few circuses handy these days that running away seems scarcely worth the effort, especially if they're having deep dish apple pie on the night of departure. Thinking back on my first journey into fear, when I holed up in that tent, I was suddenly reminded of the second time I absconded. I don't recall now exactly what I was sore at, but I was mad as a wet hen at something, very possibly school, my parents, or the weather. Also, I had been reading Huckleberry Finn, who had run off down the river with the slave Jim. This is heady fare for a young man resentful of the adult currycomb. My heart was sore and my disposition desperate. "What's graveling you?" the old man asked. "You look like you're about to cloud up and rain." "I am," I said. "I think I'll run off. Don't nobody around here understand me?" The old man sucked on his pipe and crooked an eyebrow. "That's a prime pity," he said. "I know how you feel. If I wasn't so old and rheumaticky, I'd run off with you. Miss Lottie." He shrugged. "But I guess I'm too old and sot in my ways. However, you don't want to take this running away too light, and absconder burns his bridges behind him, because once you've lit out, there ain't no returning." I muttered something about I didn't care if I never saw nobody I knew again, except maybe the old man, and I guess I'd just put that in to be polite. Running away from your responsibilities takes the power of preparation, not to mention precautions. The old Injuns used to tie a tree branch to the horse's tail and sweep away the hoof marks as they moved camp, and any hobo will tell you that you got to travel light, but you still got to carry most of the things you need when you're alone in the woods in the night. Seems to me we better practice a little before you run off permanent. You gonna take your gun? I better. I'll have to live off the country. I better take some line and some fish hooks, too. The old man looked at me. "You ain't very big yet," he said. "A gun, even that little 20 gauge, can get powerful heavy. Or was you planning to steal a raft like Huck Finn and live on that for a spell? A boat ain't gonna take you no farther than Wilmington unless you care to ride these reefs here on the ebb tide and hit the open sea for Charleston." "I'll hoof it," I said, mean and stubborn. "Don't you worry about me." "I'm not," the old man said, a little too cheerfully. "I just don't want you to be ashamed in front of the other hobos for running off without the full kit. Of course, you'll need 2 blankets, a hand axe, a knife, a canteen, a skillet, a coffee pot, some iron rations, and some salt and pepper. With that gear, you ought to be able to live off the country. Any idea where you're headed?" "No," even more stubborn than before. "West, maybe. Maybe to Canada. I don't know, and I don't care." "Well, if it's Canada you got in mind, you better take more than 2 blankets. I'd say about 6. It's cold in Canada. Was you planning to live with the Eskimos or the Indians and be a trapper, or will you fetch up as a cowboy?" "That's if you decide on the West." The old man never cracked a smile, but I could see he was up to his old tricks of going along with my tantrums, and this made me even madder. "I'm going somewhere, all right," I said. "Maybe one day I'll write and tell you where I wind up, if I ain't too busy." "They're a little short on communications in the Arctic," the old buzzard said. "But I would appreciate a birch bark postcard once in a while if you can wrestle down a caribou and ride it to the nearest trading post. But in the meantime, we better get you outfitted, because there's no telling how long you'll be gone. In fact, you may be gone for good. Now, we'll do a kind of check-off list, and I'll see, can I get you geared up for the road? I'll even do more than that. When you're ready to roam, I'll drive you a half dozen miles out of town in the Liz. This is a kind of covering your trail. People don't reckon you're running away. They'll just think you and me are going hunting or fishing like we used to before you got restless." The old man stared at the sky. "I'll miss you, you know. You got your faults, but you were a pretty good hunting and fishing partner. I guess I'll have to stir around some and dig me up another boy." I ignored that one. It hurt, but I let it fly by. "Well," the old man said, "there's no time like now for running away. It's pretty late in the afternoon, but it might be raining or even snowing tomorrow. It's a chance you have to take. Now you go collect all your gear, and mind you make them blankets into a tight bundle so you can strap them on your back, and you're going to need a belt strong enough to carry your axe, your knife, your canteen, your coffee pot, and your skillet. These things don't pack so good. Too much bulk. And then, of course, you're going to have to tote your shotgun and a knapsack full of things like fresh socks and underwear, a little salt pork and flour and sugar and salt and coffee. You can't hit the road without the basic essentials. You can't go off half-cocked. Get moving now." Well, sir, I was a sight for sore eyes. I must have weighed about 90 pounds stripped. The gun weighed 6, and by the time the old man had strapped a blanket roll and a knapsack on my back and draped a cartridge box around me like a bandolier and hung things onto one of those World War I Webb pistol belts with the hooks on, I must have weighed 200 pounds. It was a pretty hot day for winter, but the old man made me wear my mackinaw too, because he said you never could tell when it would turn real chilly, and catching pneumonia when you were all by yourself in the woods with nobody to nurse you was even too much for a Blackfoot brave. We lost more Injuns from the from the pneumonia than we ever did from the cavalry, the old man said as he helped me, clicking and clanking and sweating into the tin Liz. Seems like most Injuns suffered from a weakness in the chest. That and diphtheria, not to mention starvation when the big snows come and the buffalo crop ran short. If I was you, after you decide roughly what you want out of life, I'd head for some place like Mexico where you can always eat lizards and sleep out of nights if the Aztecs don't sacrifice you to one of their gods. Not once did he twinkle. He was as stony stern as the preacher when he talked about hellfire and damnation. Mostly I could surprise him in a twinkle, but not this time. No twinkle, nothing. He had to help me into the car. Cars had high running boards in those days, and boys had short, fat legs, and this boy resembled a walking hardware store more than he resembled a boy. I sat down with a clank and a rattle, and all you could see out of the mess of equipment was my face and my feet. Somehow I didn't feel like leather stocking or Daniel Boone. The old man cranked up the Liz and off we went, me rattling inside and the Liz rattling outside. The old man was garrulous as we rode. He pointed to a cornfield off the right with a stand of second-growth pine trees on its rim and side. We had us some mighty good times with the dogs there, didn't we? He was talking to himself. I'm sure going to miss opening day of the quail season with you not here. I may not even hunt. Hunting ain't much fun by yourself, and I suspect I'm too old to break in another boy, no matter what I said earlier. Maybe I'll just give up hunting altogether. I'm a little old to be alone in the woods with nobody to run for help if I fall into a stump hole or bust a leg or something like that. The woods can be mighty lonesome by yourself, and if you get into trouble, well, his voice trailed off. We drove about 5 miles, and he stopped the Liz by a creek. You know where you are now. You've got plenty of water, and the campsite where you and me and Mr. Howard shot your first deer ain't more than a mile off yonder. I guess that taught you enough about camping to where I ain't got to give you any advice about not setting fire to the broom sedge and leaving a clean campsite for people who ain't so fortunate as to be running away. He got out of the car and opened the door and helped me out. Weighed down as I was, I couldn't have made it on my own. He clapped me on the back. So long, son, he said, and good luck. If you find the time, drop me a line once in a while. I'll be here if I ain't dead, and don't worry too much about me and your folks. We'll make out. We'll all make out. He banged me on the back again, got back into the car, and turned her around in a little sandy cut off the main road, and headed back to the village. Dusk had dropped swiftly, and I could see him switch on his headlights. The tail light winked like a malicious red eye. I stood in the middle of the road in the night and watched the tail light disappear over her eyes. I've been lonely since, but never quite that lonely, and I often wondered if the old man forgot to include a flashlight on purpose, because suddenly the night felt like a great black blanket and there was no moon to lead me to the campsite. Walking through the brush was impossible, encumbered as I was by all the tinware the old man had tied to me. This was, I believe, the first time I ever realized how big the world, how absent the moon, and how lonely the loner, not to mention how long was eternity. A problem that had been bothering me a lot. There was nothing to do but make the best of the mess I'd landed myself in. I clanked a couple of 100 yards off the main road, found myself a little bare patch of ground, and unslung about 100 pounds of accoutrement, cursing myself and the old man for not remembering the flashlight. I lit some kitchen matches and managed to scramble up some pine cones, which made the beginnings of a fire. In the faintly flaring light, I was able to pick up a few dead branches, and I found a fat pine stump that granted me a few slivers of lightwood. Then, with the fire blazing, I was able to accumulate a few dead logs. Well, I thought I had a man's first friend, fire. I took the hatchet and went round the perimeter to the little longleaf pine saplings and cut myself sufficient butts to make a springy basis for a bed. I spread one blanket over the pine branches, weighed its corners with stones, and pulled the other blanket up over the bottom covering. At least I had a fire and a place to sleep. But a sudden pang in the pit of my stomach told me that I didn't have anything to eat. There was about a half a pound of side meat in the knapsack, and that would have to do. I put the fat pork in the skillet and browned it, mentally deploring the waste of grease, and chewed on enough of the fat meat to quiet my belly. The stars were out now, and I lay down on my bed. The pine boughs were not nearly so springy as I remembered, and some of the butts gouged me in the back. Owls hooted, and there were the usual myriad night noises that were so terrifying unless you have company. Dew fell, and the blankets were stiff with it, and my face was wet cold with it. The fire was flickering low, casting eerie shadows into my imagination. I was a big boy. I was big enough to shoot a gun. I was big enough to run away to the west or to Canada. But I was not so big to cry. I cried myself into a semblance of sleep. It was just dawning when the rattle of a car stop roused me from a nightmare-ridden slumber. In a few minutes I heard footsteps out in the bush and an occasional curse. It was the old man standing over me, looking down at a very lonely lad. "I wouldn't have come back," he said, "but when I was helping you out of the car, I lost my best pipe. You seen anything of it?" "No, sir," I said, scrambling out of my uneasy bed. "But if you like, I'll help you look for it." "All right," the old man said. "It's a little dark yet. Where's your flashlight?" I forgot to bring one," I said. "Well," the old man said, "I didn't. Suppose you use mine. And the next time you run away, be damn sure you're fully equipped for it." Of course, he never lost a pipe, and he did not insist that I strap myself back into my running away kit. "I told your grandma you'd gone camping with some of the other boys," the old man said. "If I was you, I'd keep my mouth shut about this." "Yes, sir," I said. "This was the first time I've opened it, but since everybody's gone but me, it don't make no difference now."